Hi, everybody. Maurice Belote here with California Deafblind Services, and welcome back to our Tuesday afternoon mini training. We're so glad to have you back with us. If you are returning, and welcome if this is your first time. I am going to share my screen, and we'll go over a little information right at the beginning here. Excuse me one second while I work through the swirling rainbow of my Mac. Okay, so thanks for joining us. The training will be recorded and archived on our website. So if you go to our website, there's a menu down the left side, and down towards the bottom, there's a page just for these Tuesday afternoon weekly training activities, and all of the past ones are archived there. Thank you, Brian, for keeping that going, along with handouts and all the topics for the upcoming training activities are there. I will talk for about 30 minutes, and then we'll have 15 minutes for questions and discussion, and we'll end promptly at 15 minutes after the hour. If you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, you can either put it in the chat box or click the raise hand in your Zoom toolbar. We will talk about raised hand questions and comments during the 15-minute discussion time. If you want to speak during the discussion, just mute yourself. Feel free to do that. And as I said, a link to the handouts will be posted in the chat. So today's topic is motor considerations for signed communication. This is a particular interest of mine, and I hope it's interesting to you and gives you some information that's helpful for working with your students or for your own child. What I'm going to do in this presentation is, first I'm going to show you slides of the main points I'm going to make. Then I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to demonstrate. And then after the demonstration, I'll go back to the slides as a recap. So we're going to do slide, activity, slide, or what I'm calling SAS. So we're going to get sassy here. So first of all, let's look at the slides. I'm going to be focusing on imitation and then other motor considerations for sign. But first of all, I want to say thank you to Marcia Dunn-Klein for this amazing book that she wrote many years ago. It is called Pre-Sign Language Motor Skills. It was first published in, I think, 81 or 82. I had a copy when I was a brand new teacher. Over the years, I lost track of it. And just by chance, Dr. Deborah Chen, retired from Northridge, emeritus from Northridge, Cal State University, Northridge, was getting rid of some of her materials in her house and sent me a bunch of boxes of books, and this was in the box. And I thank Deborah for thinking of me and sending me some materials. So what I'm going to be talking about today, some of it is based on my own ideas, and some of it is taken directly from Marcia Dunn-Klein and her resource, Pre-Sign Language Motor Skills. Okay, before we talk about specific motor issues, I want to remind everybody that when we use signed communication, and I'm going to say signed communication and not sign language, because the signs that you're using may be part of a language, either English or American Sign Language or Spanish or something else. But regardless of whether you use signs as part of a language or you use them individually or key signs to communicate ideas or whatever it is you want to communicate, it's always signed communication. So when we make a sign, there are 4 parameters to every sign. There are actually 5, and I'll tell you what the 5th one is. But the parameters are hand shape, palm orientation, location, and movement. So let me use the sign toilet as an example. When you sign toilet, the hand shape is a letter T. The palm orientation is facing out towards the person you're communicating with. The location is in front of the shoulder, and the movement is shaking back and forth. And every sign has these 4 parameters, regardless of what you're signing. There's a hand shape, there's a palm orientation, there's a general location, and there's a movement. Now, in American Sign Language, there is a 5th parameter, and that 5th parameter is the facial expression, the face. We're leaving that out today because we're not talking specifically about American Sign Language or ASL, and many people who are deafblind can't don't have the vision to access facial features. So when we sign with children who are deafblind, some of the meaning that in ASL is conveyed through the face, and sometimes also through the upper body, that meaning has to get conveyed in some other way so that the child can understand. So for our purposes today, we're just doing 4 parameters of sign. So this is what we're going to talk about. First of all, we're going to talk about imitation. In general, when children learn how to imitate, they learn gross movements before fine movements. They learn how to imitate movement towards their bodies before they learn to imitate movement away from their bodies. And number 3, they learn to imitate movement towards midline before they learn movements away from midline. And midline, if you think of a line going right down the middle of right down from the top of your head and all the way down your body. So you've got a right side of the right side of this midline, and you've got the left side. So imagine just a line going right down, starting at your scalp and going right down the front of your body, straight down. Sign basics we're going to cover. Signs that are the most iconic, might be easiest to learn. Signs where the hands touch the body, or at least where the hands touch each other, might be easier to do. These are specific to children who are deafblind. Signs that are within the child's visual field, if the child has vision. Signs that are within the child's visual field might be easier to do. And signs in which right and left hands mirror the same bilateral parameters might be easier to do. And the reason why might is in italics in every one of these bullets is that these are generalities that I have learned over my 39 years as a teacher of children who are deafblind. Your child or your student could very well be the exception to some of these. If I've learned nothing else in 39 years, it's never suggests that anything I say is going to apply to every single child, because I definitely know that it doesn't. But in general, I have found these things to be true. And then finally, we'll end with Emily's conundrum. Emily was a student that I provided technical assistance to her program. And she had really limited fine motor abilities, because of physical disabilities. And so what we discovered with her is we had to be very careful about which signs we taught her, because she may only be able to have, for instance, one sign that happens around the chin or mouth area. And so we'll talk about that at the end. So I am going to stop sharing. And I am going to just talk and demonstrate. And I'm on my best behavior today. I have a solid dark color that contrasts with my light skin tone. And I have a solid background behind me and the best lighting that I can do under the circumstances in my home office. So, imitation basics. First, gross movements before fine. So when young children learn how to imitate, they generally learn to imitate big arm movements before they learn to imitate fine finger movements. So, that if a child signs, let me think of a sign. Okay, here's the sign for mom. So it's a number 5 hand at the chin. The child might learn to get, or might imitate getting the hand up to the chin area, but may have a harder time making the five hand with their fingers. The sign for play, for instance, the sign for play is 2 hands that are in the letter Y, the manual alphabet Y, and they're out in front and they go like this. So the child who's imitating the sign for play might get the location of the hands and arms, but may have a hard time, or very likely will have a hard time making the letter Y. It's tricky. Your little finger has to stick out and your thumb has to stick out. Or the sign for more, which is a really common sign that a lot of people work on. So the child that in the sign more, that the hand shapes are what we call flat O's. So you take the letter O and you just flatten it. And you take 2 flat O's and you touch them together in front of you. The child might get the gross imitation of the hands coming together long before they master the flat O. Okay, so that's the first imitation basic. The second imitation basic is that children generally learn to imitate movement towards the body before they learn to imitate movement away from the body. So they may learn to imitate signs like want. I have to make sure I'm in the screen here, or so you can see it. Want, or maybe the sign for love, before they learn to imitate signs that move away from the body, like, for instance, thank you, or here's one, bad. Here, let me turn my head a little bit, bad. So signs that movements and signs that come towards the body tend to be imitated before movements that move away from the body. And then finally, movements towards the midline are generally imitated before movements away from midline. So again, imagine midline is this imaginary line that runs right down the center of your head and body. So signs that move towards the midline, let's use more again for an example, more, or here's a popular sign, shoe. So the sign for shoe, the hands move towards midline. Signs that move away from midline, think of a sign like large or big. So it moves away from midline, or think of the sign different. So it starts at midline and then goes out. Some children will imitate signs and movements towards midline before they will imitate movements away from midline. Now, while we're talking about midline, let me mention a couple things about midline. Some of you may be familiar with the milestone in child development of crossing midline. And by crossing midline, in this sense, we're talking about maybe if I take my right hand and I move it over to the left side of my body, I'm crossing midline with my hand. Now, we know that infants start learning to cross midline in the first few months of life. However, the ability to successfully cross midline in all situations develops over time. So children are still developing the ability to cross midline well into the first couple years of elementary school. And we know that children who are blind or visually impaired, and that includes children who are deafblind, crossing midline, that skill may come a little bit later for them. And it's not necessarily like the child's hand just gets to midline and then there's a wall there that keeps them from crossing over. But what we see more typically is that the fine motor skills and the gross motor skills become less well developed once the hand and arm crosses midline. So it may be that the child wants to sign, okay, so let's use a name sign. Like imagine, this is not my name sign, but imagine my name sign was the letter M for Maurice over the heart. And that's a very common name sign, location for a name sign. So people will take the first letter of their name and do that letter over the heart. And since I'm right-handed, I have to cross midline to sign that way. So for children who are trying to sign name signs that are over the heart, and if they're right-handed, it's when they cross midline, it may be harder to get the location right and to get that letter M right. But maybe on the same, if I was doing it on the right side, I would be much more successful. So it's not like all of a sudden the child just hits a brick wall and can't move their hand past midline. It's more like all of a sudden they're not quite as skilled on that side of their body. So that's an important thing to remember. Okay, so those are imitation basics. Now, let me talk about signs. For many children who are deafblind, signs that are iconic are easier to learn than signs that aren't. And by iconic, what I mean is signs that look a lot like the thing they represent. So you would likely know what the sign is even if you don't know sign. So let me give you an example. Signs that are very iconic, and I'm going to show you a list in a minute of the most iconic and least iconic signs that from a study that was done years ago. Toothbrushing is a very iconic sign. Drink is a very iconic sign. Combing hair is a very iconic sign. And the great thing about iconic signs are that you can take the object that's used in the activity and help the child learn the sign with that object. So I always tell people drink is a really easy sign to teach because once the child has a cup in their hand, you can have the child drink, take away the cup, and they've got the sign. Or have the child brush their teeth, take away the toothbrush, and the sign, and they've got the sign going. Or have the child, here I've got a comb here, there's my comb, I'm going to comb my hair, take away the comb, and there I've got the sign. So signs that are iconic for some kids, especially kids that don't have functional vision, are often easiest at the beginning than signs that aren't. Okay, that's the first sign basic. The second sign basic, signs that touch the body, or at least where the hands touch out in space, are easier to make for a lot of kids than signs where the hands are just floating out here in space. So a sign where the hands are floating out in space is a sign like toilet. And sadly, it's a really hard sign to make for a lot of kids. But that shaking T is just out here in space. So signs where the hands touch the body, like mom, hungry, candy, happy, those are all signs where the hands touch the body. For some kids who, especially children who don't have good a good proprioceptive sense, or a sense of proprioception, so they may not have accurate information about where their hands and arms are and what their hands and arms are doing. They're not getting that feedback physically. For those kids, sometimes this is especially true. And think about all the kids who have poor proprioceptive skills. Those are kids maybe who have Charge syndrome, children who have Down syndrome, children who have cerebral palsy, even students who are on the autism spectrum experience problems with their proprioceptive sense. So signs where the hands touch the body are often the easiest, and signs where at least the hands touch each other out in space, like same, or sit, or cookie. So at least the hands are grounded to each other out in space. For kids with poor proprioceptive skills, the hardest signs are these ones that are out here in space. And that's why we sometimes adapt signs so that they do touch. So the sign for want is like this, but for some kids who are deafblind, they'll put their hands together when they sign want. If you know sign, it's likely you're going to recognize that sign even though the hands are together. Or let me give you a really common sign in our world is the sign for grandmother. So instead of the typical sign for grandmother where the hand moves away from the chin, we put the two generations together and have them touch. So here's mom, and here's one more generation out, and that's grandma. And you could do this with lots of signs. You can do it with weight. So instead of going like this for weight, you can put the signs together, or the hands together. Okay. The third sign basic is for children that have some functional vision, signs that are within their visual field are easier to do than signs that aren't. And that makes sense, total sense. So if the child is receiving some visual feedback about what their hands and fingers are doing, they're more likely to make the sign accurately. Signs that are in the visual field, signs like toilet, milk, a lot of the colors, like the color blue that I'm wearing today, those are all signs that I can see in my visual field. Signs that aren't in my visual field, signs like computer, rabbit. Let's see if I can get rabbit right. Rabbit's not a very common sign, but I was just thinking everybody wants to sign rabbit at Easter time. So rabbit, here's one, diaper. I might have to stand up to do diaper, but diaper is down here on the hips. So those are signs that are outside of the visual field. But you can allow the child to look, like say the child wants to sign computer, but the C is at the forehead, so the child can't see their hand up there. They can look at their hand and see the letter C and then decide where they want to put it. So is that C going to become chocolate? Is that C going to be a church? Is that C going to be police officer? Or is that C going to be computer? So they get their C, they got their C already, and then they move it up to the brain, and that's where we get that sign. So the computer, which is a C up near the brain, because computers are so smart. And then finally, the fourth sign basic is signs in which the right and left hands do the same thing. So signs where the two hands may be out in space, but at least they have the same basic parameters. So signs like play, the two hands are out here, but they're kind of doing the same thing. Or the sign for more, or the sign for want. Those are all signs where the two hands are doing the same thing. Signs where the two hands are doing two separate things are signs like show, where my dominant hand is an index pointer and my non-dominant hand is flat. So show, or help, or potato chip. That's a popular sign. Those are signs where the hands don't do the same thing. And then finally, Emily's conundrum. So just remember that if a child has limited fine motor skills, at least for now, and you are going to teach a sign that, say, is up near the mouth or chin, and the child doesn't have a lot of fine motor skills to do different hand shapes, so they're just gonna kind of hit a fist up against the chin. Remember that there are a lot of signs that are around the mouth and chin. So if you are going to teach the child a sign that's like that, that may be the only sign that they are able to do that's around the mouth or chin. And think about all the signs that are around the mouth or chin. Mom, eat, breakfast, beer, for students who are 21 and over. There are a lot of signs around the mouth. So, if you have a child like my student that I served, Emily, who had really limited fine motor skills, think about what that one sign is going to be. If the mother would really love that child to be able to sign mother, then don't waste that location on orange when you're teaching colors. Just keep that in mind when you're thinking about teaching new signs. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint, and we'll go through these one more time. So remember, with imitation, most children imitate gross movements before fine. And now you have these, you have some of the examples that I used in the PowerPoint that's up on our website. Children learn to imitate towards the body before movements that move away from the body. And they learn to imitate towards the midline before they imitate away from midline. And then with sign basics, signs that are most iconic, like toothbrush, drink, or comb, might be easier than signs that aren't. Signs where the hands touch the body are easier than signs where the hands are just floating out in space. And signs where the hands touch each other are the next easiest, next to signs where the hands touch the body. And here's my list of sign iconicity. Years ago, there was a research project where they asked a very, very large group of adults who are blind to make a decision once they learned a sign, how much the sign was like what it represented. And I have the list, and I have it here, but it's in a book that I don't have access to. It's in my office. And so I was hesitant to give out the list right now because I can't properly cite it, but I will. I'll put it up on the website as soon as I can have access to my building. But iconic signs: up, eye, nose, toothbrush, baby, cry, drink, door, big, rain, and signs that aren't iconic at all, totally abstract: mother, potato, medicine, what, store, father, who, do, color, number, not iconic in the least. Remember that signs that are within the child's visual field, if they have vision, might be easier than signs that they can't see themselves when they make the signs. And signs where the right and left hands are doing the same basic movement might be easier than those that don't. And finally, Emily's conundrum. Remember that when you are working with a child who has limited fine motor skills, just think about how many different signs they're going to be able to put in a certain location or with a certain movement, and make sure that you choose the one that's most important for that child. Don't waste orange if you could have had mother or eat. That's just an example. Maybe orange is very important. Who knows? Okay, that's it. 30 minutes. I will take questions. We have 15 minutes.
Hi, Maurice, this is Julie. You have